All right, Alexander, let's talk about the economy in the UK. Let's discuss Starmer, who
Mm,
has made it through another Christmas as
mm.
prime minister. Or is this his first Christmas or his second
Second Christmas.
Christmas?
Mm.
Okay, so he's made it through his second Christmas as prime minister of the UK, and as we have been saying on this channel for a while now,
Mm.
Starmer. Well, for his 2 years in office, Starmer's main goal has been to take the UK back into the EU,
Yes.
to reverse Brexit, and he is making some headway.
Yeah.
So what's the update?
Well, I think the last point you've just made has actually nailed it, because this is increasingly now becoming his main policy. So let's look at the overall political position at the moment. We've had more opinion polls. The opinion polls put reform, Farage's party, far in the lead. I mean, they are polling around 30%, and it's been steady now for several months. And there's been various attempts to knock down Farage. One of our newspapers, The Guardian, has been raking up stories about what he said as a schoolboy 50 years ago, whatever it was. I don't think that's impressed many people, other than the people who read The Guardian, actually. So for reform, stable. The Conservatives have slightly blipped upwards, basically because Labour is blipping downwards. And it looks now as if the Conservatives have a small lead over Labour. But both parties are polling well under 20%. I mean, unprecedentedly low numbers, and one gets the sense that the Conservative upward blip is ephemeral, and that the Conservatives are going to stop blipping down again, and is again purely a product of growing unease with Labour, which is now third. Political polling figures that have never been seen for any government that I can remember at this point in its life. I mean, it's still, remember, a relatively new government. And yet, in spite of everything, Keir Starmer is still there. The Labour Party, unable to replace him. They've not been able to agree on who will replace him. And he, in the meantime, is trying to shore up support within the Labour Party and within the Labour Party's base, and this is becoming very, very visible now, by accelerating the drift back into the EU. So we've had a whole series of decisions. The first decision, the one that's attracted the most attention publicly, is a decision to rejoin the Erasmus program. The Erasmus program is one where EU states pay for students who are within the EU to go and study in their various countries. It is very popular, extremely popular, with middle-class people in Britain and with some of their children. So this is always a major issue for the Remain voting middle class. Starmer has given it to them. There are claims, which I'm not going to try and unpack, that in fact for Britain, this is a loss-making proposition, because many more EU students come to study in Britain than British students go to the EU. But I am not familiar with all of the figures, and I'm not going to try to unscramble the numbers. But anyway, that was one thing he's done, and maybe it's the least controversial. He's done other things. He's now readopted EU standards in agriculture, which means, in effect, that food production in Britain is now going to be regulated by the EU. So that's a big thing. Now, agriculture, I should say, in Britain is in deep trouble. There was an article which appeared in the Financial Times just a few days ago, which actually had the extraordinary title, which said that it is no longer profitable. In fact, it is a loss-making proposition for farmers in Britain to grow food. It's quite incredible to read. But the farming industry, agriculture, is in serious trouble. And farmers, independent farmers, are being particularly hard hit by this. And by the way, and just for the record, the Financial Times article said that the reasons it's now becoming such a terribly difficult thing for farmers to be able to do is because cost of energy is so high, cost of fertilizer is so high, and all of this is linked to the Ukraine war. Financial Times said that. So, entire historic sector in the British economy in serious trouble. Starmer has also removed exemptions on payment of inheritance tax by British farmers on their land. When we die in Britain, we pay the government a large sum of money, in some cases, if we own enough, basically as a death tax, reducing the amount that we are able to leave to our family or children. Farmers have historically been exempted from this. For one thing, they tend to be land rich, and land has value, but cash poor. So there's worries amongst the farming community that this is going to hit their ability to actually pass on their farms to their children. So farms are in very great difficulty. They're now subject to EU regulations which Britain cannot control because they're decided by the EU Commission, they're decided by the EU courts, and they might become increasingly burdensome. In fact, they probably will become increasingly burdensome. And of course, the other thing this does is it makes it more difficult for Britain to negotiate free trade agreements with other countries that are also agricultural producers. So that's one thing that's happened. The second is we made major concessions on fisheries. Britain historically has had fishing exclusive zones around Britain. Remember, the British tend to eat a lot of fish. Historically, it's part of our food. Well, that basically has been negotiated away, and it's very difficult to see what we've got in return for it. Not very much, I would say. Once upon a time, that would have been, again, a very, very controversial issue. The British fishing fleet has now dwindled to microscopic levels, but it is still going to be, I suspect, very unpopular in fishing communities or formerly fishing communities, which, by the way, just saying, used to vote Labour. And we've had further rules on technology, on high technology and science and those kind of things. Again, we are going to be moving to accepting European rules. So step by step by step, we are going closer, deeper back into the EU single market. And it's been heavily pushed by the sections of the media which continue to support Remain. They argue that the causes of Britain's economic problems are that we left the EU and that we quit the single market. I personally don't agree with any of that. I think that ignores completely the realities of the economic situation in the EU. But anyway, let's put that aside. You can see the direction of travel, and it is accelerating. And in the meantime, what Starmer gets in return is that he's able to attend more and more meetings held by the EU on foreign policy questions, which, as we know, is his major focus. Foreign policy questions, when we talk about that, that's code for questions about Russia and Ukraine and the war. So the direction of travel is very clear. Labour is sinking. It is continuing to sink. It is not prepared to say openly what it is doing about reintegration into the EU, but the momentum there is accelerating. It's exactly what we said would happen.
Sinking and tying itself to the sinking EU.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So basically food and technology is going to be controlled by the EU for the UK.
Yes.
That's pretty big.
Well, very big.
Does it get any bigger than that, to be quite honest?
No,
and the UK because it's not a member of the EU, will not have any vote or say in any of this.
No, of course not. I mean, I remember when we discussed Theresa May's plan, we made that very point, that what Theresa May was insisting upon, what she wanted to do, was to keep Britain in the single market. And we made the point then that that would mean that Brussels, the EU, would regulate the British economy without Britain having any say in it. It would put Britain in an even worse position than it was in before it left, because at least then it did have a notional say in EU regulations and EU policies. And we find exactly the same thing happening now. By the way, one of the things the British thought would happen, just to give an example, was that they expected that they would be allowed to pass through e-gates at airports, that the EU would allow them to do that. I mean, many countries can do that. Australia can do it, and all sorts of other countries can do it. British travellers still cannot use EU e-gates at airports. So we see that at the moment, Britain, Starmer, he's not visibly getting very much back. But he is invited to some of the big meetings. And that, I think, for him is very, very important indeed, because as we know, foreign policy and being able to meet with his friends, Macron, Merz, that is what really matters.
The whole thing makes no sense at all. No. He's giving away the UK's control over food and technology so that he can gain access to Project Ukraine. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, the UK's sinking, the EU's sinking, Ukraine is sunk. This is his deal. And I believe last week, the United States paused the $40 billion technology agreement that they had going on with the UK, or an AI agreement. I forgot exactly.
Well, they have.
What was that? It was a big tech deal that they signed, Trump and Starmer, and they're making a big deal over it. This is a huge partnership, Britain and the US, and that's been paused now as well.
Well, of course it has, because the whole point about that big deal, the big American investment, was that Britain was not going to be subject to EU regulations in technology and science and all of these things. Well, of course, now we are. So the attraction for the US, which does not like the EU regulatory structure, has disappeared. So, of course, they put this thing on pause. And sooner or later, when something like this is put on pause, what that usually means is that it will die. And that is what is going to happen. It is going to die. So you are, by the way, just to say again, you are replacing a relationship with a fading technology group, the EU. Everybody, if you go in a newspaper, you will see that they are agonizing about the fact that they're falling behind in technology.
Well, they have no AI, they have no social, they have nothing when it comes to tech. Yeah,
exactly. And you're turning your back on the Western technological superpower. So there you go. But that's presumably a price that Starmer thinks is worth paying. In return for getting, as I said, all these invitations to the big table in Brussels
to discuss Ukraine.
To discuss Ukraine. And in the meantime, as I said, his base, which remains fervently pro-EU. I mean, there is a significant, I would guess, around 15-20% of the British population, middle-class people, who are fervently Remainer and EU. Well, I'm not saying that they are overjoyed and happy with this, because they're under considerable economic stress themselves. But he's at least coming along and telling them, look, I'm moving in your direction. I'm starting to do things that you like reinstating the Erasmus program.
I mean, you could reinstate that without giving away your food and technology, can't you?
No, of course you can. no problem. But as I said, he's going a lot further than that, actually. And as I said, the pace is accelerating. We're going to have a lot more of this over the course of next year. And if Wes Streeting, who is now his major rival on the Blairite right in the Labour Party, and is widely expected to be the person who will probably take over from Starmer when eventually Starmer goes. Well, Streeting is an open Remainer. He is openly saying that the pace of this must be accelerated much faster, and that ultimately the objective, I think he said this, should be for Britain to rejoin the single market, full stop. In other words, reversing completely the Brexit that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings negotiated in 2019, bringing us back essentially to where we would have been if Theresa May's Brexit had been enacted. And we all know what that means. Britain in the single market. Eventually, at some point, the logic is to rejoin.
Right, to rejoin the EU at a point in time when any sane person would advise you to not join the EU. I mean,
not to bail out. Exactly.
To bail out. Yeah. I mean, okay. Farage is the person that led the campaign for Brexit.
Yes.
He's the number one party.
Yes.
What's he saying about all of this?
Well, he isn't actually saying very much, because I think a lot of this has gone under the radar. At some point in 2026, it will be noticed by him, and I suspect he will then start to campaign on it. And of course, he's already making a big ground on immigration as well, and the working class voters who tend to support him have never liked Erasmus, for example, and he'll be able to make a big issue about that too. So this will work, I think, ultimately in Farage's favour, and I suspect we will see his support grow. But bear in mind, we still have 3 years of a Labour government with a big majority. They can continue this process. And I think beyond a certain point, what you're probably going to see is that even as they begin to recognize that they're going down catastrophically without any hope of return, they're going to start focusing more and more on this, because ultimately this is the way they bail out. They may have an electoral collapse in Britain, but what is the EU ultimately, if not a very, very comfortable second jobs home for failed politicians?
When you think about it, if you're the European Union, the last thing you want to see happen is the UK to fully enter the EU, and actually have a seat at the council and have a vote. The best option, if you're a globalist in Brussels, is to control the UK. I mean, once you control the food, you pretty much control the country. I mean, you control the food, you have a good control of the country. You keep on getting more control of the UK. Yeah. They enter the single market and all of that, but you prevent them from actually fully rejoining. I mean, that's the best outcome for the globalists in Brussels.
Absolutely, of course. And that's really what's happening, because, as I said again, Starmer is giving ground to them all the time, but it's not clear what he's getting in return. As I said, they aren't even opening their e-gates to British visitors at the moment. I mean, you still have to have your physical passports and go through passport control and all of that in the old-fashioned way. People who come to the EU from other countries around the world which are not EU members, Australia I know is one, are able to pass through e-gates, but Britons are not. So for the moment, the EU is pursuing exactly the policy that you've said. It's happy to let the British rejoin the single market so that they can control the British economy and again return it to its position where it becomes a major export market for what's left of the German car industry, for example. Remember how we used to say that Angela Merkel and her inner circle used to refer to Britain as Treasure Island, because it was this big export market for them. Anyway, so the Germans in particular have that incentive, but they don't particularly want the British back in because the British are so disruptive. They were disruptive before, and they will be disruptive again, especially, and they'll be even more disruptive in the future because there will be lots of anger and tension in Britain if they do ever rejoin about the way in which they were brought back in, and you will get lots of resentments of that kind, and that will inevitably have its effect in Brussels.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing you want if you're the bureaucrats in Brussels is another Farage in the Parliament making noise.
Exactly.
So you get the best of both worlds. That's where the EU is heading with the UK, and then Starmer serving it up to them on a silver platter.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Meanwhile, as I said, the economic situation remains bad.
Yeah.
We had a contraction in October. Deindustrialization processes continue to accelerate. Things like that continue to get very bad. And more information every day about the true state of the British Armed Forces, and it isn't good. So nothing is going well, except for Starmer, that his agenda to move us ever slightly closer, step by step, back into the EU. That is intensifying.
I mean, yeah, just to wrap up the video, I have a hard time understanding any of this, especially from a British perspective. The benefits for the UK, I don't see any. I mean, you're saying that you're having a hard time understanding what exactly Starmer is getting from all of this. But I guess if you look at this from the vantage point of globalists, of which Starmer is part of the globalist clique, I imagine, I mean, to put it simply, in a high school type of framework, I imagine he just wants to hang out with his buddies again. I mean, that's the way it is. I mean, it seems he's negotiating from the position of a globalist, not from the position of a prime minister of a sovereign country. So when you look at it like that, then I guess all of this makes sense.
Indeed, and bear in mind what I said before, there's about 15 to 20% of the British electorate which is fervidly pro-EU. And these people have convinced themselves that the reason things in Britain are going so bad is because we left the EU. I mean, that's their operative assumption. And you will have many articles and commentaries in the media that will reinforce that message. You don't talk about the Ukraine war. You don't talk about the effect the Ukraine war and sanctions and the economic war against Russia has had on energy costs. The slippery way in which they mentioned the effect that fertilizer, the increasing costs in fertilizer, is connected to the war and the damage that's done to British agriculture in the Financial Times really astonished me. But, you don't talk about these things. You don't talk about the many other things that Britain has been doing, the fact that we've had repeated bailouts of banks, which increased debt to GDP ratios and all of those things. You don't talk about things like that. You argue passionately about immigration. And again, the same sort of people who tend to want Britain to rejoin the EU want immigration to continue at previous levels. In fact, it's becoming very much an issue, a key token issue for them. So there is a division and not so much a debate about this, but a fierce argument about this. But you tell these people, your economy, your situation, your finances are under stress because Boris and Cummings and Farage took us out of the EU. And if we go back into the EU, yes, you'll get Erasmus back, but you'll get everything else. I'll be back to the golden age of Tony Blair and a new Labour when everything was so good. And your your living standards were growing year by year. And that is what a lot of these people believe. And, you can't really blame them because there isn't the message, the information to rebut that isn't really out there.
Yeah, the media makes sure it's not out there.
Exactly.
Yeah, they don't talk about the sanctions and the conflict in Ukraine, and when they do talk about the sanctions and the conflict in Ukraine, it's always from the perspective that the Russian economy is about to crumble any day now, and Russia is losing. So I mean, they give a different narrative. So someone who's pro-EU says, okay, well, you see, even the EU is defeating Russia. They're even defeating Russia, and the sanctions are working. So we need to be part of this club again.
Exactly. And again, I mean, we've made many programs about the economic problems in Germany, the deindustrialization processes, the fact that Germany has been 4 years in recession. Again, it's not really covered in the media here. You will find articles about it in the Financial Times. It's about the only place you will find it. I mean, even a newspaper like The Guardian only mentions that story very incidentally. So there it is.
Yeah. But well, just to finally wrap up the video, once again, if you look at it from the perspective of the mainstream media, they're also globalists, and they also want to get back together with their buddies.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Yeah. All right. We'll end it there. theduran.locals.com. We're on X, we're on Rumble, we're on Telegram. We're also on Substack, and go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch. Take care.